We're joined right now on RealRCulture.com by Kevin Greer. He's with the George Moore Center and he's based in Guelph. Welcome today, Kevin.
Good to be here.
Kevin, you recently gave a presentation to the Canadian Meat Council and I guess took the industry to task in a couple different ways. So what do you think about ethanol? Is ethanol an advantage for us as a Canadian industry or a disadvantage?
Well, how many ways can I say what a disadvantage it is? I think that hopefully in 10 years we don't have an ethanol policy anymore, and when we're all going to look back and think to ourselves, how did we let ourselves get into this mess? It'll be the law of unintended consequences because ethanol policy in Canada and the United States is we subsidize the purchase of the corn, we subsidize the capital grants of the plants, we protect the industry in terms of tariffs, and we mandate the use. In other words, we force people to use ethanol. So if you talk about, we think that supply management has things going for it, but this is an industry that could teach supply management a thing or two about how to get what it wants from government. So that's Canadian ethanol policy, totally at odds with any sort of conservative market principles. And so how do we justify it? Well, it's supposed to be good for the environment. Well, we're finding more and more that it's not good for the environment. More and more environmental groups are taking a step back and saying, "Oops, we were wrong." Al Gore even said, I was wrong. I did it for political reasons." So it can't say it's good for the environment. Then you say, okay, well, it's good because it replaces foreign oil. Well, again, Canada's an oil exporter, so that's kind of a silly argument. But let's just go with it. Well, you could burn pretty well every piece of corn in North America, and it would only replace a very, very small fraction of imports. So that's not a good reason. So and ultimately, what it is causing grain prices to soar. Right now we're at the point where 40% of the corn crop in North America is going into ethanol. So let's just stop and think about that. Is there anybody that thinks that's a good idea? 40% of the corn is going into ethanol with dubious benefits at all. So now we've got a situation where 40% of the crop is going in, and it's causing feed prices to soar, which is driving cattle and hog producers out of business. There's no question about that. The reason why we have meat prices rising is because ethanol has driven meat producers out of business. And so, again, the ethanol lobby will say, well, we contribute to the Canadian economy. Well, that's what the lobby says, but a George Moore Center, which is not a lobby group and which has not been funded on any research, has shown that the ethanol industry has taken away economic benefits compared to the meat industry, which has extraordinary benefits. So, like I say, when we look back on this, we will see it as a law of unintended consequences and a failed experiment.
So do you think that cattle feeders were maybe, not tricked isn't the right word, but obviously when we look at DDGs, there's been a very positive look at them in terms of incorporating them into the feeding ration from a cost perspective and some of the benefits.
Well, I'm glad you raised that because I forgot about that. There's no way that DDGs offset the soaring cost of grain caused by ethanol. The fact that you can feed it up to 30% or whatever is there's no way you can feed all DDGs in the first place. And secondly, that's the main. Secondly, it doesn't offset the massive increase in grain costs that ethanol has caused in the first place. So to argue that I like it because it's DDGs, well, you're arguing of something that it's not a sound argument because DDGs in no way offset the soaring grain costs. And if you happen to be located your feedlot near an ethanol plant, well, it still is a short-sighted argument compared to the damage that ethanol is causing the cattle and hog industry.
Well, I talked last week to the chairman of Alberta Pork and about some of their challenges, and I guess that's one of the questions is ethanol driving these two industries into a very, very bleak situation?
Well, there's no question. Like I say, if you took away the demand, again, the ethanol industry wouldn't exist without government. And I want people to realize that this is Canadian policy. Everybody in government seems to say, well, it's the U.S. that drives it. But no, I'm talking about Canadian ethanol policy. which drives the grain basis higher, again, overall North American ethanol demand is driving total North American corn prices higher, which drives the feed costs higher. So what has driven producers out of business more than feed costs? Well, you could say the Canadian dollar a little bit, but for the most part, it's been feed costs. And again, it's like I say, it's driving people out of business. The reason why we have high meat prices right now is, yeah, there's good global demand, but we have higher meat prices because there's production been cut back.
So what do you feel, Kevin, has to happen with ethanol? You know, if you were all of a sudden, Kevin Greer is now in charge of Canadian ethanol policy, what's your first decision tomorrow?
Well, the first thing that the Minister of Agriculture in all provinces, as well as the federal government, just does not seem to want to listen to what it's doing to the meat industry. So the first thing is the meat industry is getting aggressive, a little bit more aggressive, but the meat industry, I think, has to explain very, very clearly what it is doing to the meat industry, number one. And number two, the ethanol industry wants to expand from a 5% mandate to a 10% mandate. So the first thing is it's not going to go to 10%. It has to stop at 5%. And the other thing that has to happen is supposedly these policies and subsidies and so on are supposed to end. I mean, I've never seen a government program that really ends, but supposedly this one is supposed to end. And so I think the meat industry has to convince the minister that they should end. They need to end.
Right. So the GFO, the Grain Farmers of Ontario, recently put out there was a study that I think they were a part of it with Dr. Terry Daynard, talking about how we can do both, food and fuel. Do you, so you would definitely disagree with that?
Well, I guess it would say, how's it going so far? So, to me, that's that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't have it both ways. We can do both. So, in other words, we have to produce more and more corn. Well, again, how environmentally friendly is that in terms of, again, it's supposedly one of the benefits. But, I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm not. I just leave it at how's it going so far, and it's not going that well.
Do you think that in terms of ethanol, we're going to have a light bulb moment? Do you think that we're going to see a change?
Well, yeah, the light bulb moment is a good one, Sean. But I think right now I saw a headline in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago stating ethanol is on the run. They are becoming very, very defensive, and that kind of the studies that come out are kind of proof of that. They are getting very defensive, and the main reason they're getting defensive is because of the soaring food prices. I mean, I've been interviewed more on food prices in the last, say, 3 months than I have been on any topic in the last 10 years. And I always point out the food prices are high because of global demand and so on and so forth. But I also point out they're high because of ethanol. And I think that politicians are starting to recognize that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too smart to have 40% or more of our corn getting burned into something that has no benefits. So. Right. The light bulb moment is probably not a right analogy because it's coming so slowly, but it's coming. I mean, like I say, politicians are starting to I mean, in the U.S. Congress, they're debating it, and they voted not to fund going up to a 15% mandate. So, I mean, the very fact that we're discussing it, discussing ethanol policies, is positive. But I think again, our meat industry has to take the time and effort to explain very carefully to each of the because each of the provinces fund this boondoggle as well. I mean, it's in Alberta, and it's going to grow, and so every minister has to understand that their actions have very, very negative consequences and very little, if any, positive consequences. So
in Canada, obviously, the bulk of our grain corn is grown in Ontario. Obviously, representing corn growers, the GFO is a big proponent of ethanol. If you put your corn grower hat on, do you see any reason why corn growers should be concerned about ethanol?
Well, I guess I always find the irony here is that if we didn't have an ethanol industry here in Canada, and again, if we wouldn't have an ethanol industry if it wasn't for the ethanol subsidies. So if we didn't have it, our corn guys would still be very, very, very happy because the U.S. industry ethanol is keeping our corn prices high. but again, that's not to say our own policies aren't damaging in terms of the grain basis, because it's all about the grain basis in terms of having a competitive livestock industry. And the more we have an ethanol industry, the more it's going to cause our grain basis to get out of line. And if our grain basis gets out of line, then we kill our livestock industry. So I guess, again, if I had a corn grower's hat on, I think I'd still be just as good off if we didn't have one at all. But the irony of it is that everybody talks about the future of ethanol is not with corn. The future is in cellulosic and all these other switchgrass and all that kind of thing. I don't know if that'll ever happen. But that's what they say the future is. So really, what we have here is an ethanol industry that's using corn, but at the first instant where they can drop corn, they'll drop it like a dirty shirt.
So who do you think is going to make changes to their ethanol mandates first, Canada or the U.S.?
Well, we're only at 5. They're at 10, going on to 15. We have to convince this minister to not let it go to 10%. That's job one. Keep it at 5. And then go from there.
Okay, Kevin. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again soon in the future.
Okay, Sean. Thanks for having me.